Dispatches.
He's the man. It's awesome, funny, random, doesn't make any sense, but it's good.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Priesthood Dispatches channel. As you can see, I brought the true talent with me tonight in the form of Sister PD, who we've not seen for a little while.
Yes, I've been in hiding.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about sex, and we'll just give the whole trigger warning thing now. It is quite graphic. I'm uncomfortable with some of it. Sister PD, I know, will be uncomfortable with some of it, but I guess Debbie Shrubb is going to talk us through it. But Sister PD, first impressions on talking about sex to the world?
I feel you may have invited me here under false pretenses, PD, and I didn't actually know that that was the subject.
Unlucky. First to see Sister PD blush wins.
I've tried to wear a red top that disguises how much my cheeks go red.
Well, we've gone all babe station here in the studio with the hot pink lighting. We'll keep our clothes on though. But our guest this evening comes to us all the way from, just another part of England, and it is the one that only Debbie Shrubb. Debbie, how are you doing this evening?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you two? Other than uncomfortable.
I'm a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's been a bit of a split decision on this one. I think some people are kind of like, ugh, and other people are like, yeah, let's do it. But just to let everyone know, this came about because at Sunstone UK in October, me and Sister PD attended a session with Debbie, and it was this session that we're going to have this evening, and it was called Mormon Chastity Dogma, and we didn't really know what to expect, but it was very good, hence why Debbie's with us this evening. But it was very not uncomfortable, but
I think it's fair to say that a number of us, post-Mormonism, still have our brains, especially that part of our brains, within the Mormon zone, and therefore that's why it's uncomfortable. And I am looking forward to spending some time with Debbie to try and change where my zone is at.
Your zone. We're going to talk about those zones later on. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a long one. So Debbie, Mormon Chastity Dogma, in a nutshell, what would you say? Obviously, I know we're going to speak a lot about it, but Dogma, why did you go with Dogma?
Okay, I went with Dogma because, as I think we realize, not all of Dogma comes under the category of commandments or actually things that are written down in scriptures. Some of it is like kind of a culture that arises around the issue. In this case, it's around sex. So as we know, there are some things over time that we were told we shouldn't do as Mormons, and then they've been kind of rescinded. So like in the early 90s, there was a little patch where married people were being asked if they had oral sex.
Ooh.
And the idea was that you shouldn't be having oral sex. I'm assuming that went down like a lead balloon, because very quickly, I think, oh yes, there's the letter. A letter was sent saying, actually, you shouldn't be asking this in temple, recommend interviews. So I would suggest that the thing around oral sex was more like some sort of, I don't know, I'd call it folk dogma. Well, rather than anything that it wasn't scriptural. I don't think there's anything in the scriptures anywhere that talks about oral sex, as far as I know.
Well, this one from the First Presidency, this was the 1989 letter, and they end it. It speaks about many things, but it says the First Presidency has interpreted oral sex. So I'm assuming they tried it to interpret it. As constituting an unnatural, didn't like the taste, impure or unholy practice if a person is engaged in a practice which troubles him enough to ask about it, he should discontinue it. So only to the men there, it seems.
We wouldn't get very far in the world if we took that approach towards everything, would we?
And I think also one of the things there, it says, if something makes you uncomfortable, one of the books that is included in the description, Come As You Are by Emily, can't remember her surname, Nagoski. She says we kind of know this from the time we're children, we're brought up, you know, like the whole reason some of this subject is uncomfortable is because when we're children, we see how maybe our parents react to it. Or like when we were children in the 60s, if there was a film on and people started kissing on the film or became more intimate than my parents felt comfortable with, they'd say things like, oh, close your eyes, and things like that. So immediately you're kind of on red alert a bit, aren't you? So just because something makes you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean there's anything inherently wrong with it. It means you've been taught that there's something inherently wrong with it, or icky, or ugh. And so, you know, this idea that we're taught in church that you're going to feel bad. If you feel bad, it's a sign something is wrong. It's just not true, is it? It's just not true.
I love that, Debbie, because it does go so much deeper than this. I don't want to take away from what you're saying, but you're right. Just because you're told how you should feel about something, A, doesn't mean that you should, and B, doesn't mean that you should explore those emotions or those feelings. Why should you be told one way or the other and have to categorize or put to one side? I like that.
Well, not to disturb this, but I scoured the internet today and found a video from the church in 1989, in fact, when that letter was written. It's called Chastity, As a Man Soweth. Has anyone seen it before? Anyone?
No.
Not okay.
I.
It's only a minute and 52 seconds, and I think we should watch it all because I think there is a lot to talk about in here. Yeah, enjoy.
You have to decide how far you're going to let it go. Are you going to let him put his arm around you? Are you going to let him kiss you? What are you going to do? And you have to decide before you ever go with him. Because when you're there, it's too late.
So once you've held the boy's hands, it's hard to not hold his hand. And once you've kissed him, it's hard to stop kissing and go back to holding hands. And once you've kissed a lot, it's hard to just say, kiss with one good night kiss.
They make you feel like, well, to strengthen our relationship, we need this and this. And, you know, when you're dating non-members or whatever, and even a lot of the members of the church are like this, they feel like they want to make the relationship grow and be more close. And you can't. You have to, in my mind, you have to wait till you're married to have a strong bond like that. Like in high school, you don't need that. Really what you need is a friend.
So as long as I'm clean, I will be able to face my Heavenly Father with no regrets. And another thing is the self-pride in knowing, hey, I can do it.
There is a line of demarcation, said President George Albert Smith, well defined between the Lord's territory and the devil's. If you will stay on the Lord's side of the line, you will be under his influence and will have no desire to do wrong. But if you cross to the devil's side of the line 1 inch, you are in the tempter's power. And if he is successful, you will not be able to think or even reason properly because you will have lost the Spirit of the Lord. Close quote. As a man soweth, so shall he reap.
Wow.
Indeed. I actually do remember that. Now that I've seen it, I remember the hairdos. I remember that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it had a lot of gravitas, didn't it? But
that's kind of what we're trying to get over here. And I think he screwed up, did David, because he talks about a line, and I know we're going to talk about the line a little later too, and how you get thrust over that line quite quickly. But if it doesn't make sense, does it, like many things in the church? Because if there's a line between the Lord's territory and the devil's territory, and if you're on the Lord's side of the line, you'll never be tempted to go to the other side. And if you're on the other side, you can't even reason and you lose all mental function. But who's tempting you to go over the line if you're on the Lord's side? Like, I thought, surely if you're on the Lord's side and you're together, there'll be no sexual temptation or anything. But isn't the whole point that you're tempted and you give into that temptation?
Well, you're tempted because it's disallowed. And in that video, the one with the great hairstyle, Debbie, you know, she was busy saying, in my mind. And I think that comes back to what you were saying. In her mind, you don't need that sort of strength in a relationship in high school. She said, in my mind, all you need is a friend. Well, you know, she's come to that conclusion. Yeah, it's because of what's been put into her mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that I think there's a lot of things that are very damaging about Mormon chastity dogma, about purity culture, as is coined by certain other Christian groups. But I think one of the really good things about it, and actually this is something that's talked about by sex therapists. I think it came from the research that was done started in 1964 by Masters and Johnson. And it's this idea that there's a sexual accelerator and there's a sexual brake. So every time you see someone and you feel sexually attracted to them, you know, there's like an accelerator on, and then all of a sudden you start thinking, actually, you know, if you're a teenager, where are we going to do it? You know, that's a big problem, isn't it? You know, there's not very many comfortable places if you're a teenager. That's why you sometimes, I was walking my dogs in the local park one day and I saw this teenager in the middle of the field, and I'm thinking, I haven't got great eyesight, and I'm thinking, what are they doing? And she was giving him a blowjob in the middle of the field, for goodness sake. Because I wasn't paying attention, my dogs ran over to them and to have a look. and I got really annoyed, and I had that like ick feeling. Instead of just thinking, this is none of my business, where are those poor kids going to go if not the middle of the field in the park? I was called out, can't you find somewhere else to do that? Because I felt ick. I thought, oh, that is not good. But actually, you know, what they were doing was part of normal teenage exploration. And I was miserable. And my dogs must have caused them quite a bit of embarrassment looking down at them like, whoa, what are these two people doing? I won't say, can we join in? Because that sounds really bad. You know what I mean? So I think, you know, this idea, there are breaks on what people do, and the church's breaks actually cause a lot of dysfunction. I think one of the young women, I think it was one of them anyway, said about waiting, I'm going to wait till I'm married. But when you think that the church prohibits self-exploration, masturbation, etc., you're supposed to go into marriage and you know nothing.
Not a clue.
Not a clue. Well, I mean, that's, yeah. So this whole idea that you've probably said things to your children, or you've had things said to you about touching yourself, or you heard other things from other people about self-exploration, masturbation. So already you're going into marriage not having a clue about your body, a clue about what works, thinking that it's some sort of sin. And then all of a sudden you're married and it's not a sin anymore. Or is it a sin? You know, can you have penis in vagina sex, but can you masturbate? If you're married, are you allowed to masturbate? You know, there's these whole load of things that you're having to figure out as a married couple. And I think that's why this idea that how you use your body is the business of church leaders or clergy of any sort is deeply problematic.
So Debbie asked you a question, Sister PD. Can you masturbate whilst you're married?
Sorry, are you seeking my personal approval, or is this the answer to the whole world?
I don't know. They want to know.
I think based on what Debbie was saying, is that a good start? Like, do you know what? I think it's your body and it's your choice.
Well,
Not said
if you
looking
want,
at him.
sorry. If you want to say, I think he was really mean then, Sister PD. And if you wanted to give him a quick kick in the ankles, feel like you can. But one of the things that we need to bring into this equation, when we're looking at sex as a biological function and sexual pleasure as a biological function, very few women, for example, can achieve orgasm through penetrative sex, through penis in vagina sex. I think 1 in 10 women, I can't remember the statistics actually, I've had a mental block.
I think it'd be
But I
a
think
lot
it's
higher in
something
the
like
church.
1 in 10 women don't orgasm at all through penetrative sex. And then only about 30% of women orgasm with penetrative sex. So that's another whole group of women who won't have an orgasm regularly and consistently by being penetrated. And that's partly because of how our bodies are made. Have you got that lovely picture, PD? That, you know, the one you particularly liked?
Okay, yeah, just hold on to your seats, guys.
Because the image is just flashing in my peripheral vision
Is it-
now.
Is it the one with both of them, or is it the other one?
It's the other one first.
Okay. Okay, guys, hold on to your seats.
Okay, here it is. So you're looking at, obviously, a female external genitalia. The majority of female sex organs are hidden. That little hood at the top, which I can't point at, but you know how it goes up into like a diamond at the top, and that little hood at the top is that, there we go, is the clitoris. But it's only a tiny percentage of the clitoris. The majority of the clitoris is inside the woman's body. It's like wings, if you like, that go either side of the vagina, and kind of during intercourse, when a woman is aroused, they kind of enclose the vagina. I'm gesticulating here as I'm doing. I'm trying to, but the average clitoris is between 3.5 and 5 inches big. So, you know, most of us grow up thinking that that little hood there is as good as it gets, that is our clitoris, but it's much, much bigger, as you can see at the, and perhaps PD, if you could show the big pictures. Okay, now this is where, just bear this in mind. As you can see, on the left is a penis and on the right is the clitoris. When the fetus or embryo is in the uterus, the uterus has, not the uterus, the fetus has exactly the same anatomy until about 6 to 8 weeks, when there's a surge of male hormones that start to make male sexual characteristics develop. And that depends whether there's an XX or XY chromosome. So, but I just want to show you that on the right, the clitoris, that's much bigger than most people realize. I think you'll agree. It's just...
This end is just what we were just looking at. And
yes,
the rest,
it is.
The rest of it is internal.
That's right. Like I said, it kind of goes around, under and around the vagina. How you orgasm, whether you orgasm with a penis inside you or a vibrator inside you, largely depends on how close, apparently, the clitoris is to the urethra, where your wee comes out, for those that don't know. So you know, you can see that if you're telling people that they can't masturbate in marriage, if people go into marriage believing that they can't masturbate, that's going to probably create a problem in terms of sexual satisfaction for women. And I would argue for men as well, because I think there have been a lot of myths about men making women feel happy with sex, and that has to happen by the penis being in the vagina. So if it's not happening, that's, I would have said, a disappointment for the male as well as for the female. But so this idea that masturbation shouldn't happen, which was certainly, I think, implied to me. I mean, I think, I don't want to embarrass my husband who's sitting in here, but I think we'd known each other for quite a long time before we got married. Unlike, I think you two had known each other for a long time, hadn't you, before you were married? So in a way, I felt like our marriage relationship was separate from church dogma, and I didn't feel it kind of apply. I don't know, we did our own thing. If we felt okay about it, we did it. And I think when the letter came out about the oral sex, I think I'm fairly certain when I was asked in a Temple Recommend interview, I was thinking, who are you asking me this? You know, why is a car salesman asking me if I'm, you know, giving my husband a blowjob? Come on, no.
Is Debbie telling us? Is that Debbie telling us she was nuanced even back then? If I felt comfortable, then I did it, and I don't care what the car salesman says.
Well, I think I was a convert, so whether that made a difference, and also my mother, even though, you know, it was back in the, you know, I was born in 1958, and my mother was prudish in many ways, but she drilled us about what to say and do if men were inappropriate. So like if a man tried to pinch your bum, what you should say to him. And I think,
can we have that line, Debbie? Just
she'd say, keep your hands to yourself. That's what she'd say. You say to them, keep your hands to yourself. That is exactly how she would have said it. So I think probably in that way I was quite well equipped. I also think by the early 90s, when that question started to be asked, I was starting to get a bit pissed with the church. There'd been various things that happened that would make, I think I was unraveling from the church at that stage, but I just didn't realize that. So this idea that that you shouldn't masturbate is going to cause some sort of sexual problems, I would say, in the marriage.
Well,
so and the other thing, now I'm going to be on a roll here. I think it was Natasha Helfer pointed this out in a video, or someone like Natasha Helfer, Julie Hanks, someone like that. And they said sex is a skill. You don't, as we've said, you don't get married, go in and know exactly what you're supposed to do necessarily. Well, unless you've been reading something. Anyway, sorry, PD.
No, several points to that. First of all, I totally jumped the gun, and everyone, we just got straight on with the sex. It's a little bit like being 16. But Deborah used to be a Mormon. She's left the church. So that's the 10-minute bio we spoke about. You've had children, so you know how sex works. Also, Deborah is very qualified to speak on this topic. It's not just someone that we found on the street. Deborah,
unlike you and I.
Yeah. Deborah has spent many a year within the NHS teaching survivors of cancer and other disfiguring ailments about how they can continue to have sex when maybe missing body parts and different things, or medication that ruins your libido and things like that. So Debbie has spent a lot of time on this, so we do give some credence to what she says. When it comes to, as you mentioned earlier, the dogma not being involved in your marriage, I think it was in ours, because we got pushed over that line. We were together 5 years, we did the whole mission thing, and then we got back and it was no sex, no sex, no sex. And then just because we said a couple of words in the temple, it was like, right, now go make babies. But no one gives you the instructions on how to do that. And like you said, Debbie, it's a skill, and I think it was a skill for a long time that we were practicing and failing.
How do you, that is just such a great comment. It is a skill, And how do you learn that? Because we've said, haven't we, that the church's thing is very much a period of time, you not even to entertain the thought of it, 1 line or 2 words, as PD said, and then suddenly you're away. But you don't know what you're away with because you don't have any skills.
Well,
No.
can I just say, when you read 50 Shades of Grey,
I was saving that for later.
my world changed.
Let Debbie speak.
Anyway, well, going back to, I mean, in response to your question, what you've just said, Sister PD, as PD said, my background is nursing. I trained to be a nurse when I was 18, and over time I worked in various different clinical areas, but mainly in cancer care and palliative care. And it became really, well, sex, you can never escape sex. Even if you want to escape it, you can't escape it. So, you know, in the 70s, as a student nurse, you were very much part of the workforce. It wasn't university based. And if you were working on a care of the elderly ward, you would almost invariably go into usually an old man's room, and he would be furiously masturbating under the bed covers, and we'd kind of roll our eyes, pull the curtains or close the door and go out. So it's kind of there, but it's never talked about. And that picture of the external genitals of a female, how it was depicted was how it was in textbooks then. And actually, I have a fairly new textbook actually, comparatively. I worked at a university for a while lecturing, and it was my mainstay and AMP textbook, and that picture came out of there. And actually the word clitoris wasn't even in the index, and whether that was an oversight, I don't know, because the picture was obviously there, but it hardly even got a mention. And back when, so that textbook must have been, I don't know when it was. It must have been about 2010. Well, the first kind of research that was done trying to kind of understand the clitoris was done in 2009 in France, and they did ultrasound studies of the aroused of the penis, clitoris, and actually it is similar to as I said earlier, the in utero, when the baby's in the uterus, before this surge of hormones between 6 and 9 weeks, somewhere around then, when the male, there's no male and there's no female, other than the one's got XX chromosome and one's got XY. So it's all very much the same until if you like, the fetus is sexualized, and it goes on to develop into a fetus with male characteristics or female characteristics. So no one had asked any questions about the female anatomy. Female anatomy is very under researched. So this research, even though no one had really asked the question about, you know, how do ladies work as opposed to gentlemen? So when they did this study, and they did it on the aroused female, they probably got her to look at pornography or something like that and attached things to her and did ultrasounds. What they realized was, and probably people knew it anyway, that when a female or someone with a female body has an orgasm, their clitoris becomes engorged in the same way as a penis becomes engorged. And it can, I think Simon will hate this, it can become up to 300% bigger than in the unengorged state. He doesn't like 300% because he says you can only go up to 100% in anything, but not in the book I've read, Simon. You can do 300%. So it becomes much, much bigger. And in, now what would it be?
And that's the female statistic, Debbie. 300%.
Yeah, because I'd clearly be like 700%.
No, so when a female is aroused, her clitoris becomes erect, if you like, and up to
Yeah.
that, yes, between 50 and 300%. So significantly bigger. But it's if you like, what Emily Nagoski says in Come As You May is that males and females all have the same kit. Intersex people, trans people all have the same kit, but it's just different sizes or in different proportions, or, you know, different balances of hormones, if you like, different amounts of testosterone, cells speaking to each other in different ways. So this idea that there's a binary, and this is quite contentious, and there's a thread right now in one of the post-Mormon groups about this. Someone get feeling a bit feisty about trans folk. What most people think now, or what a lot of scientists think, is that sex is a spectrum, gender is a spectrum, that it's not binary, it's not male and it's not female. But going back to the point we were making, I digress there, but going back to the point we were making, it's really important to remember that female bodies become aroused in not dissimilar way to male bodies. Women aren't sex light, if you like. There's been this kind of idea over the years that women are less sexual than men. And that just isn't true at all. There's no research that would back that up or support that at all.
Okay.
You're going to get us back on track, PD.
Yep. Okay. Well, I've put a poll for anyone that's on YouTube. Did you ever lie in a worthiness interview, Sister PD?
I think the answer's got to be yes.
I'm a yes. How about you? Well,
yes,
no.
I'm a yes.
Okay. This just turned into an interview. Do you lie? No. And we've got 3 votes so far on the on YouTube, and they all say yes. So we're 100% so far. If there is anyone out there who never lied in a wordness interview, please put your hands up, because I think those interviews are just ridiculous, obviously, because they would always catch me out. And before we go any further, we do just want to say that we've got a goal for this video of 150 likes. Obviously, if you're not subscribed yet, please do so. And we're going to work really hard this evening to deserve your like. But a question from John Barnsley, and I think this is something that we kind of just addressed, but he said, estimates of how many couples who are interviewed about moral worthiness for a temple marriage lie about their experiences.
Are you interviewed together? I can't remember.
No, you're not interviewed together.
I didn't think you were. No.
I remember lying through my teeth said too much. But yeah, I remember lying to do things because things had happened. Nothing that anyone should worry about. Say something.
I think you're not making it. You're looking at me as if to say we were in this together. I'd like to say that may not be the case.
No, you were definitely there.
You're not interviewed together, are you? I think it's a bit of one of those things about we'll put this one in that room and that one in that room and see what comes out at the end of it. You know, the truthfulness.
Well, you could be interviewed by different people, couldn't you? By different people on the bishopric. I mean, in some ways, just looking at Ruth's comment there about the church or the corporation likes to push the idea that women are less sexual through its purity culture. Actually, that's a societal idea. That kind of, the church is like patriarchal, that in my opinion, Ruth, is patriarchal society on steroids. The idea that women are less sexual is extremely, it's millennia old. Aristotle actually believed that men were like the active partners in sex or in reproduction, and women were just like the fallow field waiting to have the seed planted in. Women who were seen as very sexual were sometimes burnt as witches, or actually they had their clitoris removed because they believed that the clitoris was the root of all evil. And I don't know a lot about female genital mutilation, but I wonder if that, well, I think my understanding is that's very much about men controlling women's sexuality and keeping it for themselves. So I think definitely the church pushes this idea, the dogma pushes that idea, but I think it predates Mormonism by a long way.
Yeah.
I think there's some shorts to be done there, PD, from my facial expressions, as Debbie talked about female mutilization.
Yeah, and just at this point, I think it would be important to and responsible to point out that because they've already been through some pretty heavy stuff. So if anyone is struggling with this, if anyone has experiences in their past, we don't want to trigger people with no resource. So down in the description just below, there is a link, if you're in the United States, to the RAIN charity for survivors of sexual abuse. And there is also a link to Survivors Trust here in the UK. And as I always say, if anyone is outside of those jurisdictions, just pop a message across to me on Facebook and I'll try and find your local help. Because we do talk about a lot of things that might not trigger us, but there are people out there who will struggle with these things. So yes, thank you. And
can I just hold on, because I should know better as well on that one. I was teaching study days, or I was facilitating study days when I was in clinical practice, called what were they called? I've just had a mental block there. Assessing and addressing sexual concerns, and they were like a mixed group of healthcare workers, and it was looking at our own attitudes about sex. But also looking at the side, looking at what people do and what is normal. And in fact, everything is normal, really. It's extremes of things that are problematic, not the acts themselves. But we always started the study days with a trigger warning. And one of the things, sadly, we found we do need to remember that something like 1 in 3 women have been victims of sex abuse at some time in their life, and 1 in 6 men, and probably 50% of trans folk have been the victims of sexual assault. So I apologize if anyone's beside the everyday normal squirm thing that we all experience at times when we talk about things that are different to us, or that we've been taught are not okay. I recognize there are people for whom this is an extremely fraught subject.
And may I just chip in, not about triggering, but about a word that slightly triggers me. We don't do normal in the PD household. And when I say we don't do normal, normal is a word that I strongly dislike, because who is to say what's normal and what's normal? I understand where normal comes from, but I feel that society wants us to be normal, and normal is just a statistic. You be yourself and you do you. Statistics are there for some reason, but they're not necessarily there to change who you are. We don't do normal. We do us.
Well, Sister PD says that because she's fed up of sitting in a room with me crying, saying, I just want to be normal.
Well, I think I completely agree. And I think, again, this is a point that Emily Nagoski makes in her TED Talks. She said, when someone comes to her and says, I've never had an orgasm, is that normal? She says, I say, yes, that is normal, because this percentage of people don't have orgasms. Or someone says, I've never had an orgasm through male-female sex. Is that normal? And she'll say, yes, that's normal, because for some people that is normal. So what she's trying to say is the diversity of experience out there is all okay. And there are things that we can do to kind of adjust our experience and make it a more joyful pleasurable, healthy experience, if you like, i.e. one that doesn't cause distress. But where you are right now is okay. And let's look at some ways to take you to where you might want to be.
Or where you didn't know existed.
Exactly, yes, yeah. Or, you know, sometimes people think that something is normal, and actually abuse, for example,
Yes.
abuse can become normalized, and sometimes we need to say, actually, that isn't normal. You know, that, well, in some ways it's so common, you'd have to say that it's part of the norm, but it's not okay. Maybe that's a better word.
It's not acceptable.
It's not okay.
Okay. Well, in the chat, Ruth and Soraya have been mentioning about what their children were taught at church. For those who sent their children or were in the church long enough.
Can you put the comments up again, PD? Because I was so busy
so
being in my brain.
Ruth said, only after we had left the church did we find out some of the dreadful stuff our children were asked and taught at church. And Soraya followed up with, hi, Soraya. Yes, and they do a great job in making you feel unworthy even after repenting, and the fear is instilled very early to keep you in line. And I think this is very true, you know, that the church would like to teach abstinence, and the way that they teach it is anything other than abstinence means eternal damnation and weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, which is quite unhealthy, because what's the load of the guilt if that child does make a mistake? I've been there where you make a mistake and then you feel like there's no way forwards, because the church has set out a pretty, you know,
narrow path.
Yeah, and you know that if you're outside that path, you're going to outer darkness, and everyone else is going, you know, to the celestial kingdom. And the shame and the guilt is ridiculous. And then when you actually do speak to a priesthood holder, it all gets very, where did you touch her? Where did she touch you? How did you feel? And different things, to the point that you just lie to them to get them to go away. But speaking of the church kind of overstepping and extremes, this rocked up on our ex-Mormon screens about a year ago. And some people will remember it, but this is ridiculous. So the commenter from BYU Idaho, is it kind of ridiculous that in my human anatomy class they censor parts of the body?
Yes.
It seems a bit ridiculous to me, seeing as we are literally studying those specific parts,
of which we all have one or the other.
I know. And you can see down the left-hand side components: ovaries, vagina, uterus, penis, testes, function, sperm production, fertilization, hormone production, and literally all of those parts are covered up. So these people are going to go on to be
very confused
doctors. Very confused doctors when they pull back the covers and there isn't a red circle there.
But it also makes you wonder. I mean, I've got a medical textbook from the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and interestingly, the pictures of people have little military caps on. So it must have been a military textbook. I don't know, because they've got partial uniforms on, but the women have male-shaped bodies, but without penises, essentially. And then, as in these diagrams, their breasts, I was going to say private, so I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to do that. Their breasts, mons pubis for the woman, penis for the male, are covered up by fig leaves. Actually, they've got little pictures of fig leaves over. I think it's just awesome. Fantastic. But so for the church to be doing this, like,
in
100 years later.
One explanation that I got was, and this is obviously not a formal explanation from the church, it was just someone from BYU, not a student from BYU, saying this is why they think they do it. And it's only in the first years textbooks or online resources. And the first years before they changed the missionary age were all 18 to 19, and then would take a 2-year break to go serve a mission. So why would the church want to put pornographic medical images in front of vulnerable 18-year-old young men that will then go home and masturbate over their textbook in order to deny themselves the opportunity to go on a mission? I don't know, like, but it just seems ridiculous that
it's
you're grown
insane.
adults and you can't be relied upon not to crank one out over a cartoon.
Yeah, I mean, so many things going on there, aren't there? For example, this idea that, I mean, it's going back to this idea that sex and sexuality are inherently bad, that there's something wrong with your body and there are parts of your bodies that you shouldn't look at. Actually, one of the things that I made myself a little note earlier. If we're thinking about the impact on those kind of messages about our bodies as single people, you know, the actual impact of wearing temple garments to cover your nakedness, you know, for me, you look back, don't you, and you think of the things that you did and that you accepted without question, really. But just this idea of covering your nakedness,
well,
no wonder we end up with issues about our bodies and how we look, and maybe concerned about people seeing our naked bodies.
Well, something that I really struggle with now because of that is sunburn. So because my whole body's been covered in garments for how many years and no one has seen it, I'm very white anyway and very fair skinned. And as soon as I get out in the sun, all of that flesh that you've covered up for so many years, and this is kind of I guess an side effect, but all I need to do is kind of walk out in the sun and then walk back inside, and I'd get moonburnt.
You'll have to holiday in Markham next year.
Yeah.
That's your problem.
We went.
Or keep your vest on, keep your singlet on.
It's even here, you know what I mean?
You could get yourself one of those suits that little kids have now. Actually, I think you can buy them, like a full body suit that you can go on the beach.
You'll look right normal
in
in
40
that.
degrees, yeah. But at Sunstone, you also spoke about the history of sex.
Yeah.
And the way it had been used. And you found this interesting image that kind of goes back, this wasn't planned at all, but to your blowjob in the park with a dog story. Because this is a vase or a vase, depending which side of the Atlantic you're on. And it shows all men and dogs. But if you want to speak around the history of sex and the way that it was used in the past to assert dominance, etc., that was really awkward at Sunstone. So I'd love for everyone to experience that.
Okay, well, we are of the same mind, because I was thinking, really, we need to go back a step here. Hebrew purity laws, which we know were about a lot more than who had sex with who. They were about things like whether you, in Leviticus, whether you could have a robe made of 2 fabrics with mixed fabrics. So what sort of food you could eat, etc. Those laws were predated by a couple of thousand years by other laws, Middle Assyrian laws, the Code of Hammurabi, which I think was that Mesopotamian, and various other ancient laws. And the laws in the Hebrew Bible actually were taken from those. So, for example, honoring your father and your mother, they were living in clans, and allegiance to the head of the clan, actually it was probably honor your father rather than your mother, was absolutely top of the agenda. A son that usurped his father in some of these ancient civilizations would be punished severely, because they had to absolutely maintain order. So the 10 commandments, and actually there's not 10, there's a lot more than 10, we know that, were predated by all these other ancient codes. The Hebrew codes were actually New Kids on the Block, and they changed over time. You know, they weren't fixed. So we have this idea, well, I did anyway, I bet other people were more clued up than me on this, but you kind of think of the ancient Egyptians as one people, or I did, but they were people when we took over thousands of years, and that their culture changed over thousands of years, but the laws very much stayed the same. So, for example, at some point in ancient history, it was felt like respectable women, and that was married women who were owned by their husbands, or they were single women who were owned by their fathers. So, oh, sorry, did you?
That's another veto word. Owned. Sorry, Debbie.
Well, that's essentially in ancient history, in the Near and Middle East, women were the property of men.
And I've cut you off, but I love to hear you speak about the history, Debbie. And the reason I say that is being brought up in the church has a way of making you feel there is no history past their timeline, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So at Sunstone, I loved hearing the history go further back from yourself than anything that had ever even come into my mind. So I've cut you off and I apologize. But I think owned was a trigger word for me. So I couldn't help my face. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. And I think it is hugely problematic when you realize that women at some point lost most of their own autonomy. Some women retained autonomy. For example, Jezebel in the Bible, who everyone thinks of as this, this sexually promiscuous woman, but actually was the wife of a Hebrew king. And as you probably know, she wasn't a Jew, and people thought that when you at that time, if you married if you married someone of another tribe, you adopted his god, and she didn't. She stuck with her god. I'm not sure who her god, whether it was Baal or Asherah or someone like that. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't think it was, because she was from somewhere else. Was she a Phoenician? Can't remember. But she kept her own religion, and she respected and upheld her husband as the king and supported him, but she kept her own religion. And this was hugely problematic for men in that king's court. So when the Bible talks about her, there's actually nothing about sex except that after her husband is killed and she's waiting to be taken captive, she sits in the window of the court and she puts kohl on her eyes and she waits for them to come for her because she knows they're going to kill her. So she has done nothing for her name to be associated with something bad. She was a strong, loyal woman, and she was an independent woman, even though she was given by her father in this political alliance. So women had very, very little autonomy. They were given to forge alliances if they were in some sort of powerful family, or if they were poor, they had very little power and could end up working in being a prostitute in the temple, or being in a temple where they had to be celibate. So, or working in fields, or being slaves. So they had very, very little power. So they were, they couldn't make decisions about themselves and their own bodies. And at some point in that ancient history, it was a dude who decided, it was a bloke that decided this, that women should be veiled and that unrespectable women should be veiled. And women who weren't respectable weren't allowed to be veiled, like slaves. Exactly. Yeah. I didn't do very well as a member of the church, really, because I had too much to say for myself, really. I mean, I think I was probably quite vexing for church leaders. And yeah, anyway, we won't go down there, Ruth, but yeah, I was probably I was never going to fit in really, but I just didn't. Took me a long time to realize that that was the case. So this idea of women being veiled, being covered up, and if you weren't respectable, you weren't. If you were a prostitute or you were a poor woman, you weren't allowed to be veiled. So, you know, there's this whole idea of ownership. I don't know where are we going with this?
I think we were talking about ownership, then we were talking about
so women were owned. They
mhm.
so all the laws in the Bible are mainly aimed at men.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that, because when it speaks about masturbation, it speaks in the one place about spilling your seed upon the ground and kind of serving spiritual death unto yourself or something like that in the Old Testament. And two things on that: one, you can't spill seed, so that's just for men. So women can do whatever they want, which is great. Go for it. And two, the Old Testament laws were fulfilled according to the New Testament. So it's like the church just picks and chooses what they want. So the whole spilling your seed doesn't seem like who spills it anyway, guys? Catch it. But if we've not scared you enough this evening, back to plugging my own stuff. This Wednesday, PD's Paramormon Investigation Part 2, the final part, will be out. And yeah, if you've not seen Part 1, head over to the channel and yeah, watch me scare the bejesus out of myself. But speaking of masturbation again, something that you came across, Debbie, was a tweet from Fishy Fishers, who was a member of the church. She says, I was divorced at 25, and because I remained unmarried, had no sexual contact until I left the church at 39, 14 years. And my bishop sent me to addiction recovery when I was 31 because I masturbated approximately once every 3 months. That's just shocking. Like,
that is shocking. And actually, if we hold that thought there, I just want to go back to this ownership thing. Women were punished in ancient times if they committed adultery or if they broke laws. They had things like, if you wore a veil and you weren't supposed to wear a veil, you could have your nose cut off. Or if you committed adultery, you could be stoned. So it wasn't that they weren't punished. But women were only supposed to have sex with their husbands, whereas men could have sex with prostitutes that were given to him. You know, if he had slaves, he could have sex with the slaves. So there was that. But in terms of, I think that tweet is a really good reminder. I think it was in about 2019 in General Conference. A leader, I think it was a female leader, as I'm remembering, said that 51% of the membership of the church are single, you know, so they're not in a marriage relationship. So that means that not only have we got all these prohibitions for younger people about what they can and can't do, but as with this woman, we're telling full-grown adults what they can and can't do, and we're expecting them to remain completely celibate, maybe for the rest of their lives. And this would probably apply more to women than to men, because if you're thinking that you're going to marry a church member, then you could be waiting a long time, couldn't you? Because well, I don't know, I haven't been to church for a long time, but there weren't as many men in the church as there were women.
I think
there was certainly more older single women. And I look back now and I think I never gave a thought to what was being asked of them.
Oh, I think we did.
Yeah.
We came from a ward that had a lot of single sisters.
Yeah.
And, you know, being open about our TBM sort of, you know, teachings. I remember when I was TBM thinking that one of the things that would be most difficult for me to deal with would be having a child who was homosexual. As we have opened our eyes, opened our minds, and moved away from the church teachings, both PD and I think, you know, would we rather one of our children is attracted to someone of the same sex and is in a loving relationship for the rest of their lives and has that emotional connection with people, or was within the church where you are asked to remain single, as you say, for the rest of your life, simply because nobody with the same belief system as you know, comes along, I would, you know, from the, what is it? We're mammals, you know, we're instinctive animals. You're not supposed to be alone. And that is the teaching. So why, therefore, are they teaching people that they should stay alone? I just, this is a crazy round for me that doesn't add up.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems, I was just going to say, with regards to the single adults, if there are any out there, I feel for you, because when the church tells you you've crossed the line, so everything's go, and then you get divorced and you've come back over that line and everything's stop, you know, and I've seen maybe some of the bad side of that when people, even people who've been married and divorced, get married again very fast. And I know we've spoken about youngsters in the past getting married very fast, being very young, growing up then together and realizing that they got married too fast, and they got married because all of their hormones were pushing them in that lustful state to want to have sex, and to do that you've got to be married. But something that I was weighing up, cost benefit analysis here, fornication, divorce. Okay, the if you're divorced, you lose 5 years, not temple recommend, but you can't be like a temple worker or anything like that for 5 years, and you will lose your temple recommend for a time, but eventually you'll get it back. Now, fornication, yes, you'll lose your temple recommend, but there is no stipulation on being a temple worker in the handbook. So what I say to people is, it is far easier to have a one-night stand, see if you like the person, than it is to get married for a week and get divorced. And I've seen both situations, and divorce is just messier and it costs more. Whereas, you know, if you do happen to find yourself in that situation, rather than just kind of rush a marriage proposal, let's just take things easy and, you know, take it slow. Like, I don't know. I just think the church puts a lot of people in very pressured situations because, as well, once you've had it, it's hard to just forget about that, isn't it? It's hard to be like, well, I popped the cork, but I'm going to put it back in, you know, for the next 50 years until I find another TBM, another single gentleman or sister or whatever in this ever diminishing pool. Yeah, it's
just so everyone knows that that's the same phrase that PD uses about a famous ice cream, Ben and Jerry's. Once you've had it, it's really hard not to have it anymore.
I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, not that I don't, that once you've had sex, you desperately want to have sex again. I think it probably depends on you as an individual and your experience within marriage. But, you know, I think the idea that people who've never got married don't have a sex drive or have a lesser sex drive. I think that's I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that.
No, I think everyone's got obviously different levels of sex drive. I guess my point would be, once you've been married for a time, you fall into very well-worn patterns maybe of expressing your love, and then I've not been divorced, so I'm only assuming, and people can put me right, but to then switch that off and not follow them patterns again with another person who you feel equally as strong for, just because you don't have a piece of paper from the church, seems... And I think the church is worried about it too, because they seem to be doing more and more single adult firesides and like regional events. There was a European one not so long ago with Elder Holland, and there was some literature about you know, surviving after divorce. So I think they know it's an issue because they probably lose a lot of people as well, you know, in that divorce moment, when either one person has done wrong and does go their own way according to them, or, you know, a lot of divorces come about because another person lost their testimony. It seems to be that the church has put themselves in there where we probably all would be able to manage our own sexual affairs given the opportunity.
And given the teaching, which I think PD won't let me touch his mouse. Now, that's not a euphemism. I keep wanting to show comments and PD won't let me touch his mouse.
Touch it. Everyone look away for a minute.
I think, you know, based on what you said there, we should be able to manage it ourselves, and we should be able to manage it ourselves. Comes with education. And brought up in the church, you're not being educated, are you?
No. And I think completely. I think this worthiness interviews, as we've already discussed, are problematic, not just for teenagers, but they shouldn't be happening. I've actually had this conversation with a couple of my believing friends who are both in really lovely marriages. And they said, well, we really like going for our temple recommend interviews. It's an opportunity to check in. And I was trying to say, well, but they can be really problematic. You know, we shouldn't be asking people. We shouldn't be asking people personal questions. And we also shouldn't be expecting them to cough up money so they can go to the temple. I didn't quite put it like that. I was a bit more polite, a bit more sensitive. But I think because church members are taught not to criticize leaders, it is really difficult for them to say, I found this interview with this person deeply problematic. And it's probably once people leave the church and in the post-Mormon community that you start to say things openly about things that actually that shouldn't have happened to me. I shouldn't have been asked that question. I shouldn't have allowed that to happen. But you're by the time you're kind of, I was going to say seduced into it, which is probably the wrong word given the subject matter, but you're kind of lulled into this thing where you start telling people things that you would never, even if you went to your GP and she or he or they asked you some of the questions bishops ask, you would be making a complaint. So why? So yes, I think you're completely right, PD. We should, and I think also the point about history, Sister PD, you know, we're sold this idea that the church is a restoration and that over time the gospel's always been on the earth, but there have been, groomed, Ruth, that there was the gospel was on the earth with Adam, and then there was a falling away, and then it was on the earth with Noah, etc., and so on. I really want to swear at this point, but maybe not. But it's a word that's to do with this session, beginning with B and ending with KS. It is absolutely that thing, isn't it? To say that
our American viewers will never get it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Do you want me to say it for them?
You say it.
It's bollocks.
Bollocks. Yeah, is that a good English word? It's one of my favorites, actually. I love that word. But it's just,
we might have to start using it more.
Yeah. So we're kind of fed this idea about this, and I think learning more about the history of ancient societies, and there is absolutely no evidence that the gospel has been on the earth since the beginning of time, which obviously, if you're a Mormon, was 7,000 years ago. You know, oh my goodness, the whole. Do you ever rub your head and think, how did I believe this stuff? Why didn't I? Why? Give his head a rub there.
Oh my gosh, so many.
Yeah. So it is not at all unreasonable if you are a nuanced member, or to start saying, well, you know, what is the evidence that the gospel has been on the earth repeatedly over 7,000 years? What is the evidence that the earth is only 7,000 years old? What is the evidence that these laws that we that are the basis of all the other laws we have, these Hebrew laws, have any relevance to us at all? They absolutely don't.
I assume you can't pass your temple recommend interview by replying, no comment.
No comment.
Well, I think I mean, in my world, in my ideal world, people would start saying, actually, going to the temple is not that important to me. I mean, why would you want, this is off subject really, but why would you want to go and take part in 19th century Masonic rituals? Really?
Yes, that's for the after show, Debbie. Keep that till the after show.
Yeah. Anyway,
Cosplay.
that's another thought. But yeah. So some of it, I mean, for me, and I think this is where my kind of peeling away from the church came, was when I was working in cancer care, and then I was starting to do more and more teaching. I was realizing that how these absolutely lovely people who just happened not to be members of the church, or sometimes were members of the church, were having these kind of sex lives that worked for them, but was so outside what is prescribed for us, or was prescribed for us as Latter-day Saint Mormons, and indeed other Christians as well. And I think that was actually part of my peeling away. When we started to do these study days, we involved someone from a local charity. It was a sex education charity for men who have sex with men, and they particularly didn't want to call themselves an LGBTQ plus charity, because they said some of the men they were seeing regarded themselves as heterosexual, but I don't know if it's PC to say this, but their bit on the side, I don't know why I'm worrying about PC at this stage, actually. Their bit on the side was a man. So we used to live in South Devon, and you'd be driving around the local, Dartmoor and stuff, and you'd see a whole load of scaffolders vans and BT vans and other workman vans, and you'd be thinking, what are they all doing in that car park? Well, it turned out that they were having orgy sex. And I mean, I don't know why. I don't know what I even thought they were doing, but they were a feature. Or there's a forest in South Devon called Haldon Forest, and I'd be driving back from walking the dogs, and you'd see all these vans parked along the side of the road, and I'd be thinking, oh, there's a lot of people walking their dogs today. You're so naive when you're but it turns out that they were going there, meeting there to have group sex.
Debbie has the best stories.
Oh, I've got one about you later, don't worry.
I said Debbie has the best stories.
Oh, well, when this guy was telling me, and the penny's dropping that you are really naive, but the whole thing of this was that that really struck me was that men who were having sex with men, some of them were in straight relationships. And that was it was like their recreation, if you like, their recreational sex. And I think I started to realize the diversity of sexual experience, and just how I don't feel like it was wrong. I feel like, people think when you leave the church that you kind of throw away all your morals, don't they? That you're, you're the usual thing, that you're going to sin. But actually, I think a lot of, I don't know what you two think, you become more values driven. And I think it became for me more about respect for others and understanding how important it was that people were able to give informed consent to the activities they took part in, and that their health, how were they looking after their health when they were engaging in these various practices. And yeah, I think that really became that became, if you like, that kind of framework started to take over for me over a morals driven framework, a doctrine or a dogma driven framework. And I don't think I realized at the time how, I think I was sitting in church meetings thinking, actually, I don't agree with this, but you don't always realize what that means, do you, at the time? But yeah, anyway.
Well, so we're coming to the end of the slides, but there's one that I think is particularly interesting that you brought to my attention a couple of days ago. And I don't know how I feel about this one, because on one hand, I say to the church, piss off. But surrogate mother, this is from it's from Reddit, but it's from the General Handbook of Instructions, speaking about surrogate motherhood. And saying that, highlighted there in the middle, children who are born to a surrogate mother are not born in the covenant. And on one hand, I think, how dare they? If it's that person's child, why should you make them feel less than by not having that child born in the covenant? And why? Because there's questions that have come up later in life as well. When someone says, were you born in the covenant or on your church record when it had your sealing date with your family, etc. And people might be asking why, because your parents have always been in the church, and then you have to explain to someone, well, I was my parents used a surrogate. Now I can see there's nuances in there, because obviously depending on which side of things, if you used all the ingredients from both parents and the surrogate just to carry the baby, or if it was the surrogate's eggs or whatever that might be, but I just think it's pretty hurtful, possibly, to say that child's not born in the covenant now.
And also, why does it say in there that they may be sealed only with the approval of the first presidency? What objection are they going to have? I just find that a bit strange.
Yeah, well, it's a real power thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
And that has been the history of sex and the history of women as possessions of men, has been about men's power over women, and also over people that don't over people's sexuality generally. I think one of the things that really struck me when I was preparing for the Sunstone presentation or discussion, it turned into, it was fantastic. People were fantastic. Is how exclusionary these doctrines are. The 51% of people who are never going to, or are not in a marriage relationship, people who don't have their children in a traditional, in the usual, oh my God, who don't have a normal vaginal delivery, shall we say, it is so exclusionary on every level. LGBTQ plus folk, the 2015 policy about, it just is never ending, isn't it? And it's just dangerous. Oh yeah, that's a really good point, Ruth.
Ruth is getting some serious loving on the comments.
She gets star of the session.
Oh, sorry, Ruth. Sorry. I didn't mean to.
Wait.
Anyway, but I think that is a really good comment. In fact, I was saying this to. This isn't really to do with this, but we were kind of talking about our faith deconstruction and about the time that we spend on things, and the time we inadvertently misspent, and time we spent. We have family members in Sussex, so we drive to Devon to the temple to visit family members. We'd spend a couple of hours, and then we'd go and spend half a day or a day at the temple doing things for dead people, supposedly. And you just think,
working for the dead rather than getting to know grandchildren.
Yeah, exactly. Or older relatives that you don't see very often. So yeah, so that's and I, linking it in with this is the amount of pain that is caused to people by policies like this, that, as you said,
just
Sister
not
Dee,
necessary.
Not necessary. And when you think about how biologically driven we are, I think, the thing about lying in temple recommendations, really, we should have had that, the Zelf on the shelf soaking video.
We've not been there.
But,
So
the things that people do so that they feel like they haven't broken a commandment, but they still satisfy their sexual needs.
Yeah,
their biological drives. Come on, kids.
Or there was the outbreak of crabs in BYU recently, underarm crabs, the same crabs that you get there, but there's not just soaking, but another version where, I mean, we're already down the path, so where the female can pull her arm to her side and the male can insert from behind the armpit and use it as a, like,
oh, wowsy.
Yeah, it's another one. Or then there's the Provo hump, where you soak and then a third party, jumps up and down on the bed to create the movement and the vibrations and the gyrations, so that the two actually having the intercourse aren't making this, it's not their fault,
Accidental intercourse.
So that's how we have two children, right?
Yeah. Anyway, but I think I said to PD when we were chatting the other day, our bishop, before Simon and I got married, basically said to me, don't worry about anything, like, that sort of anything. Don't worry about sexual intimacy before marriage, just get to the temple, is what he was saying. I'm not going to use those euphemisms. That's what I interpreted him saying, and I'm sitting there. I've been on a mission. I've got the LDS Mormon CV. Thank you. I've been on a mission, and the bishop was a social worker, which is actually quite unusual, isn't it? Usually bishops have no sort of training that would be of any use for them as a bishop, in my opinion, or many bishops don't. That may be completely unfair of me to say that, but that's how I feel about it. But that's what he actually said. Don't worry, just go to the temple.
I thought you were going to say that he told you, don't worry, the Spirit will guide you.
No, he didn't.
He'll be there to say
step 1, step 2.
No, he was much more. I mean, yeah. Well, yeah. So I think it was, he must have heard other people come to him and think, actually, oh right, oh, that's really interesting. So it's bishop roulette, isn't it? Whereas someone else, the slightest thing, a breast squeeze, and you're not going to the temple.
Or a sip of coffee. Yeah.
A grope.
Something you said at Sunstone was that you'd heard another one where young men would wear oven gloves in order to touch young women's breasts, and then it didn't count.
Our very wonderful daughter-in-law told me this.
Did it start with, I was once with this guy and he started putting oven gloves on?
Oh no, she didn't say, oh, I always wondered why Duncan kept oven gloves. That sounds so unfortunate. I wasn't going to mention my family. He'll be cool about it. I always wondered why Duncan had oven gloves in the glove compartment of his car. No, she saw it on the internet. I think she must have seen it on some sort of she's very well informed about church in all its glory.
Well, I think
yes, and she actually helped me with the Sunstone session. She was really good. It was really supportive. So it was an oven glove, but actually people shouldn't need to do that, because what we're talking about are normal. They're normal behaviors. There's nothing wrong with them. I did have a kind of, Natasha Helfer talks a lot about pornography, doesn't she? And that there's no such thing as pornography addictions. And so before Sunstone, I did some reading about that. I looked on non-church sites to see what they were saying about pornography. And it was very much that if as long as it's legal pornography, and not images that people shouldn't be looking at because they're criminal, that as long as it's not interfering with your life, you're not going to work because you're watching porn all day, or you're not communicating with your family, or the only way you can have an erection is by watching porn. That's when things are problematic. But watching porn is not in itself, from the individual's point of view, problematic. But PD, you had a fab thought about this the other day.
Yes.
He's a very wise man, your husband, Sister PD.
I just want to say, take this the way it comes out. I'm starting to get a bit worried about the comments of when we spoke the other evening, and I'm like, I've got no idea what's been going on.
Having been a connoisseur of porn for many years, we were talking, weren't we, about the illegal side of pornography, because the church will stand up and say how it's involved with sex trafficking, with slavery, with underage activities, etc. And that is a problem. I'm not saying that's a problem at all. But what I was thinking...
You're not saying that's not a problem?
Yeah, I'm like...
You just missed a word there.
Well, I'm not discounting those things. My apologies. But what I'm trying to say is there are so many other areas in life where the whole food chain is monitored in order to guarantee the best quality of, let's say, meat. And here in the UK, we have what's called the red tractor. If you're in the shop and you want meat that has been, treated well throughout its life, and that has been, fed good food and kept in clean environments and slaughtered properly, etc., you will find the red tractor logo on the packet when you buy it. And I was just thinking maybe they could do the same thing with porn. They could put like a red dildo stamp on the screen, and that means that all of those people are of a correct age. They've all consented to be there, and the environment's quite nice. They're all being paid quite well, and that there are no illegal acts happening here. And you could have independent inspectors who are just like, they'll just pop in from the side. Like, that would be the ultimate porno. It is not just the plumber who stands at the side watching, it's the inspector in a white coat with a white clipboard, and he just stands there checking it off. So it's like double good. Sorry, got carried away there.
I mean, yeah, I suppose that one of the problems with the internet now is that anyone can make a video and upload it. And that makes it much. So I suppose from an ethical point of view.
But for people who are particularly aware of those things and don't want to support that industry, if you had a website, for instance, that only listed red dildo porn, then they could just go there, and then that place would be where the money was made. I don't know. Maybe
I see that you've given this money-making scheme some thought, PD.
You don't. Now I'm thinking of buying the URL reddildo.com. But the thing is, I think in all kind of environments, it does open, in prostitution and different things, it does open itself up to illegal activity and issues. And the church will always say that we are contributing to those illegal acts, and that everyone should just abide by the law of chastity, which in their perfect world they would. But we live in reality, and in reality there will always be a marketplace for these things that push that illegal kind of envelope. So I think I think we need to there needs to be some way to verify that activity, doesn't there? But did anyone ever see the movie about the Mormon elder called Orgasmo? No, Orgasmo. It's a movie about the porn industry. And basically, there's these two elders in Beverly Hills, and they go up to this mansion and knock on the door. Now, one of these elders is particularly good at karate or something like that. I don't know. I wasn't looking at him too much. But they go up and they knock on the door, and they're making porn inside this house. And they try and get rid of the elders, and this particular one gets in a fight with the bodyguards, and then the producer or director or whatever sees him, and he's like, he's perfect for my next movie, etc., etc. He brings this missionary in, but the missionary says, yes, I will do this, but I will not have sex. So the missionary basically acts everything up to the moment of sex, and then they bring in a stunt cock who does the sex bit, and then the stunt cock leaves, and the missionary's there again in
I
his
can't believe I'm listening to this.
Orgasmo. Look it up, guys.
I'm like, did you just tell that story so that you could use that one phrase?
Stunt cock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bringing it
Anyway,
back.
yes.
I think, Debbie, I appreciate I appreciate the education. The where I come from is, as being brought up TBM, I feel personally our bodies and our minds while on this earth go through so much that actually the education about us being sexual, I feel that I'm not doing very well with my words here. What I'm trying to say is I feel that that's what people deserve, to be educated enough that they can be comfortable in their own skin to do the things that actually, from my point of view, would relax your body, would make you happy, and is a bit of an off balance against all the other stuff, trauma, that your body has to go through day in, day out, that an education in this area could actually be quite rewarding for people.
I think, and beyond that, though, sex is really important for people's health. So I'm just trying to think of some of this. There have been quite a few studies looking at general health and sexual activity. And for example, people who have regular sex they think there might be a correlation in men who have sex regularly, or at least ejaculate regularly through masturbation, a reduction in prostate cancer.
Yeah, I remember you saying.
So heart disease, it may be that there are lower levels of heart disease, better mental health, people sleep better. So there are so many actual physical reasons why people need to know their body and use their body for the purposes that it was made for. And I think going back to the 51% of people that aren't in relationships, or maybe people who are in relationships who don't have sex very often, masturbating is really important, or at least using things like PD brought the D word in, using dildos and vibrators to keep body orifices. In nursing, in healthcare, we'd call it patent, to keep it, as we know, as women get older and go through the menopause, tissues become tighter, the vagina is less naturally lubricated, and we need to be thinking about using things like dildos that keep things functioning. Besides the fact it's really good for things like reducing blood pressure, reducing stress, increasing feel-good hormones, reducing depression. So it's not just about being happy, but good health is part of being happy. It's about making sure your body works really well for as long as it can, and that I'm not sure what the church thinks about sex toys, but I think they're a fantastic idea for people who want to use them. And that takes education as well. You wouldn't need to use an oven glove then, would you?
Well, I think you could hazard a guess what they probably think about them, Debbie.
Well, the next time your sister tells me she's depressed, I will send her to this interview. No, you said that to me the other night about women continuing to use these things, and I think that was the most uncomfortable I've ever felt in this situation. Sister PD wasn't here. It was just me and you getting to know one another, and yeah, that was kind of my shelf breaking point. But I think we've done well tonight. Our time is fast spent, but we've done well. No one leave yet, because I've got a story about Sister PD that we will end with. But Debbie, do you have, I guess, any final thoughts, anything that we've not said that you really wanted to say before we start wrapping up?
Well, just a couple of bits of research about one of the things, leaving Mormonism, is having worn that underwear perhaps, or had very constricted views about what is okay. Everything is okay. And some of the things that research suggests can make people feel better about their bodies is looking at yourself naked and looking at things, saying nice things about yourself. So that is really, really hard. If you're a woman, get a mirror and have a look at your yoni. You know, have a look at your external genitalia. Get used to what your body feels like and experiment. You know, don't feel worried about experimenting. It's okay. You know, the people in the ancient world were hugely experimental, as that vase that PD showed illustrate. You know, that was like ancient porn, wasn't it? Or not maybe porn, erotica, you know, and it's okay. It's okay to feel sexy. It's okay to, it doesn't mean to say that you are going to go and ravage someone, or that you're going to rip your clothes off and run down the high street. You know, it's okay. You know, it's all.
I think it's more than okay, Debbie. And I think, speaking as an ex-female LDS, your temple garments do the exact opposite. And I think that, you know, there is, yeah, I think they're quite responsible for some of the ways that women do feel about themselves. And in particular, weight gain. They should come with a disclaimer that says, if you never see yourself naked, you may put on 3 stone.
Yeah. Well, you don't care about it yourself. You know, I mean, this is a completely different subject, isn't it? But, you know, yeah.
We'll be told off by PD, Debbie. We'll save that one.
We'll save that one. We could do our own one, Sister PD. We could do our own.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, PD.
It's okay. Well, looking at the poll about lying in worthiness interviews, we've had 26 votes. If you've not had a chance to vote yet, do so. But we do have some no's, some people, very honest people. If you are in the chat right now and you have voted no to say that you never lied in a worthiness interview and you feel comfortable, please raise your hand, because we would like to give you something. Yeah, I think that's, from my experience of Temple Recommend interviews, both being in them where I always lied and giving them where I think most people lied, I'd say those 69% to 31% are generally correct. Obviously, all 3 of us have held our hands up to it. So before I get to Sister PD, 50 Shades of Grey and all of that, I just want to say next week, our guest next week, and Debbie's looking forward to this one, is the real Illuminati. I've never met the real Illuminati or the person behind the real Illuminati, but they claim authorship of the Book of Mormon, that they created Joseph Smith, not this person specifically, but their group, that they created Joseph Smith, that they have the 116 pages and have published them, and that they have published the sealed portion. So they'll be with us next week on Friday, I think, in order to, well, for me to question them about that. Their books are very long and they are numerous, but let's see if they show up. I've never actually spoken with the guest. I'm speaking through the guest's publisher. So hopefully, fingers crossed, they make it to the interview. If not, I will be sat here and begging Sister PD to come on so I can tell her all about my research on the real Illuminati. And you know, guys, if they say it's real, it definitely is. Okay. Are you ready?
No, I would like to state for the record that I did not consent to this story being shared.
Do you even know
we
which
never
one it
even
is?
got to talk
No.
about consent. We should have talked about consent.
Oh my gosh, they're going again.
Anyway,
I'm sorry.
No,
it's important though. Go on, Debbie.
Okay. Natasha Helfer talks about, she uses the term enthusiastic consent. Excuse me. If you are trying to persuade your partner or someone else to do something and they look remotely reticent, then they haven't consented.
Or already asleep.
If they're asleep, anyway.
I don't even know how you can do it properly.
No, but to be really serious, if you're in a marriage relationship, consent still counts. Yes. So either one of you needs to be able to say, actually, I'm not enjoying this. I don't want to do this. Or we need to listen to what people say.
Safe word.
I beg your pardon. And because the person's body appears to be sexually responding, if they say no, that's what it means. No is no.
We've had this conversation, and we very, very openly. You've said to me.
I feel that you need to clarify when you say we, whether you mean you and Debbie or you and me.
You and me. We've had this conversation about having sex, right? And that. I've just said because you're like, yeah, okay, if you want to. And I'm like, no, if you don't want to, then I don't want to. Because who wants to like go to bed with someone who's only going because they feel it's their duty?
Yeah.
Is this your story?
No, it's not my story.
Okay.
This is a whole another level, isn't it? And again, one of the things is, in fact, I think there was a talk by a general authority where he actually, it was at an estate meeting. There'd been quite a few divorces. Someone was saying this I don't know where I read this.
Three divorces.
Someone was saying that in a state meeting, a state president said that the reason there were so many divorces was that women weren't being compliant enough sexually.
I have heard this, not rumor, but yes, I have heard that stated.
Yeah. So, but you could do a whole year on this, really, couldn't you?
Yeah.
But anyway, but yes, make sure that you are happy with what you're doing. Don't get talked into things that you don't feel comfortable with. Or, if you can see your partner is uncomfortable, stop, for goodness sake. Make sure he or she or they are okay.
Yes. And I totally agree with you, because I've known people who schedule it, and I couldn't live like that, because I'd be anxious leading up to it and thinking, should this not be spontaneous and loving and different things? But before I tell this story, I do just want to address a couple of things. Joan Galloway has said, she raises her hand that the temple was important. So she never lied in a worthiness interview. And to you, Joan, we give a clap. We did a unilateral decision earlier without consulting me on who the star of the show was, but I'm giving it to Joan Galloway. I was saving it for you, Joan. Another one.
It's yours, Ruth.
Smoke Menace 420, speaking about the Illuminati and the book. Smoke Menace 420, are you the guest for next week? This is the funny thing about not knowing who it actually is. And I've not seen you in the chat before, so maybe you've come a week early in order to see us. But yeah, let us know if you are the guest for next week. To the story. So, Sister PD, enjoyed the 50 Shades of Grey books, as did I. I didn't read them, but I enjoyed the effects of them. And we'd be sat in bed at night, right? And she'd be reading her book, and then all of a sudden you'd hear like grrr, and it'd be her stomach like turning as the book was saying things to her, and that was kind of weird, but it resulted in more experimentation and more money being spent. She's picking up a pen to stab me. More money being spent on toys, etc., which we'd never experienced before in our Mormon paradigm, because the church never pushes that, and you never really talk to anyone about these things because they're between a man and a woman. But we were experimenting. We won't go into that, but there was one toy, the flogger, right?
Wow.
You know what it's about now?
I think so.
Okay, the flogger.
Maybe you should check. We've just talked about consent. You better check.
No, it's fine.
Oh, it was amazing. Right, the flogger. So the toys would get left around. And one Christmas, actually, we were burgled. We came home on Christmas Eve to find the back patio doors all smashed, and these people had come in and turned the house upside down. So our children were very scared. We'd been away to our in-laws or family for a couple of days. So Christmas Eve night, the kids were very scared. They were very young. And it just so happened that on Christmas morning, I think our youngest was walking around the foot of our bed. And because these burglars had happened to turn the drawer upside down that had all of the toys, etc. in it, lots of things got lost. And Christmas morning, we're sat there on the bed, and our little girl picked up a translucent purple toy. What's this, Daddy? And I just said it's a work thing, but I'm waiting for the time she comes home from her therapist and said, we just spent an hour talking about your work thing that I found on the floor when I was 5. But that's not the story. The story is that soon after that, we moved house, and we were moving from the Midlands back to Yorkshire, and we had family members, all TBM, come in to help us move house, and we could not find this flogger for love nor money, right? So we were there waiting for, because we'd packed all the other toys up nicely and put them away. We were there waiting for a family member to kind of come down with this leather flogger and be like, whose is this? And we checked the loft. Why it'd be in the loft, I don't know. Could not find this flogger anywhere. My parents were up there, temple president at the time, waiting for them to find this flogger. And the flogger has never been found. So all we're thinking is
we deduce
the burglar.
The burglar is now enjoying it.
Well, he's in prison, so maybe he isn't. But this flogger has been like, we're still waiting for someone to like come out with this flogger.
I'm pretty sure it got stolen.
Yeah, it was fantastic. We need to get another one.
Oh, okay. That is brilliant.
And on that note, guys, thank you, Debbie, for being here. Thank you, Sister PD, for
thank you for asking me.
Bringing some magic. And yeah, everyone, please like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're on 1911 or so subscribers. It would be great over the next few weeks to get to the 2,000 mark.
Yeah, and if you can do that, that means I don't have to buy PD a Christmas gift. If you could get into 2,000 before Christmas, then that can be my gift to you.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So thank you. And we will see you next week when we meet with the real Illuminati. See you later.
Bye everyone.
Bye.